Hi everyone, welcome to the Hands-on CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Miglen Evlogiev. Miglen is a cybersecurity expert with more than a decade of experience in the sector. Currently, he's leading the information security at Payhawk, a business expense management platform and the first Bulgarian unicorn. Before that, he was working for companies like AWS and Hewlett-Packard. He's also heavily involved in the local cybersecurity community, is president of the Cybersecurity Association, and regularly organizes events and speaks at conferences like B-Sides, OWASP, Sofia Chapter, and Cybersecurity Talks. Outside of works, he enjoys extreme sports like paragliding, skydiving, and mountaineering. Miglen, how are you today?
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Adi.
Of course. So happy that you're here. Before we get into anything else, so tell us, how did you even get into cybersecurity?
That's a very long story, about 2 decades long, actually. When I was, a teenager here in Bulgaria, I think in most countries in the world where you couldn't afford a personal computer, we had these internet cafes where you could go play some computer games, maybe chat with now old school technologies like IRC or ICQ, and socialize on web forums or telnet groups. It was really, really interesting at the time to use in your advantage some hacks to get advantage in Counter-Strike or other games. So we would playing in these forums to figure out how to use certain hacks to be better at it, or make more wins at the games. And essentially, I found these small pockets of communities where they were talking about cybersecurity, hacking in this case. So it mostly a bunch of curious teenagers. Nowadays, we call them script kiddies. So they'll find something on the internet that works and they'll use it in their benefit. And they will deface websites, take them down, take over accounts, things like that to impress other people. Maybe, take down websites, put their name on it and say, hey, greetings to my friends. I've managed to do it, and so on and so on. So I started getting involved into that community until I got a slap in the wrist by the cybercrime unit, because we were even recording like tutorials how to do it, and it would get to large scale sometimes, and it would affect, let's say, small groups of people. But what really got me inspired into the cybersecurity world is two movies from the 90s that I watched at the time. One is well known with Angelina Jolie. It's called Hackers. It's very famous, I'd say. The other one is Takedown with Kevin Mitnick. And there is this character. I actually didn't enjoy that much the Kevin Mitnick role. I enjoyed the other character, Tsutomu Shimura or something like that. And basically, he was more of a cybersecurity expert that helped to catch Kevin Mitnick. So he was like roller skating. He was like this cool guy that was like commuting to work on the beach. And I was like, one day I really want to be that, if that would be possible. But as you can imagine, at the time, there were no such job opportunities. I would say globally, there were very few jobs, and you need to be very skilled, not only technically. So my career essentially started with web development. It evolved with sysadmin work. I also was a DevOps at some point. When in 2014 I moved to work for Amazon in Ireland, and this is where I started my first official cybersecurity jobs. And I was fortunate enough to work in a very interesting field with very advanced technologies, and learn from exceptional leaders. And after that, after COVID, I decided to come back to my home country, Bulgaria, where I was faced with a thriving community and really interesting job opportunities. In this case, in the face of the company I work for today, Payhawk, I was able to build the security team I am in now. I was able to contribute to the community, which is really great. I really enjoy day to day.
Amazing. And what does your day-to-day look like now? Did it look different in different companies you were in?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was having different type of responsibilities or different levels of ownership. Today, at Payhawk, I'm involved in all sorts of infosec and IT. My team is a cross team, so we do both things at once. But in other companies, it was completely different. I would have like a very narrow focus where I would do very specific things. let's say, DevSecOps or application security. And nowadays, I would say I'm not a morning person, so I'd start a little bit late. I would check out operational things, so tickets, CM, alerts, if there's something exceptional or something that needs immediate attention. And usually I'll start commuting to work. I have about 30 to 45 minutes ride to the office. So I usually consume a lot of content. That will be either YouTube or podcasts like this one, Darknet Diaries, Malicious Life, Risky Business, and so on and so on. There's so many amazing stories and podcasts nowadays. So you can literally get inspired. And by the time I'm in the office, I have this very interesting story or insights that I could potentially share, or I can have an idea as to what I can work on. When I get to the office, usually we will have a chat with the team, like a stand-up, because as I said, we are both IT and security, so we are a little bit project-based, but very operational. So we would see what the day would look like, what we have open for the day, and what projects we are currently ongoing, if there are any blockers or anything that need attention. And then full-on focus on the task at hand. Usually I try to follow the well-known methodology, getting things done. Can't remember the order, but it's very famous in the world. So it's the way you manage work. And basically you can divide it, delegate it. The very quick task can be finished within 2 minutes, but then you have like these big chunks of work that you should focus on. So I really enjoy to focus at like large chunks, to have like a proper flow. So I try not to overwhelm my time with meetings, but I try to leave enough time for meaningful work, for productive work, not to keep myself just busy. So on a day-to-day, it might be different depending on like what we have upcoming. It could be related to compliance, or it could be related to roadmaps or the team that I'm in, or it could be writing code. Some days I have that luxury as well. And usually at the end of the day, I may attend events after work hours. As I said, we have a thriving community here in Bulgaria, or I'll continue working. Sometimes if there's something interesting, I don't rush to leave the office immediately. And yeah, I'm very happy actually that I have the power over my day, which I really enjoy. And I try to not overwhelm it with meetings.
Amazing. It sounds like your day is really revolves around cybersecurity a lot beyond what I would say you have to.
Yeah. It's necessary to eat your greens, to do the groundwork that is related to reporting, compliance, and so on. But also there are like important things to, talk to other teams about like how they're embedding security in their roadmaps or their process or their tools. Talk to customers sometimes, because we as a business, we operate in a very specific market, financial market that's heavily regulated. So customers need to do a very in-depth screening and due diligence before they sign up, because essentially we're managing their funds and data. So we just ensure that they understand how much we put effort in security. And this is really important part of my job.
Interesting. Would you say that when you're learning new things, when you're like listening to podcasts or reading online, is there a specific way you go about learning about what's happening right now? Like any breaches that happen, any new technologies, anything like that? Or is it more just understanding cybersecurity in general?
I really like the title of the podcast. It's hands-on CISO. So I try to focus on the details, on the definitions of the details, not of the perceptions of others. So when there is like a breach or a vulnerability that's interesting, a 0-day or some sort, I try to go to the source and figure out what really is happening, not what somebody's interpretation is, or like what LinkedIn is buzzing about. So that would be my main approach. I really, throughout the years, I've learned to avoid like hype-driven consumption of information. Or there is a new term that was called infotainment, so that you consume content, but for entertainment purposes, not to understand the underlying technology or how things have actually worked out and happened. And I really like hands-on TLDR kind of approach to the consumption, like to be practical and applicable. And this is the way I would select the sources. They need to be very reputable. They need to be very spot on. Uh, and throughout the years, I've kind of collected a list of podcasts, the ones that I mentioned, but also mailing lists or like weekly updates that I would consume, like the SANS security podcast, TLDR Sec, for example. There is a very famous Risky Biz weekly updates that includes the sources of the information so that you can really get into the depth and details and really, for example, there was a recent YubiKey vulnerability and LinkedIn and the community really lost their minds over it. But then it turns out that it's not really as it looks like, and you need a very complex equipment and physical access to the keys to do certain things. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's like so hard and so challenging. You have easier ways to compromise the authentication and get into a company than buying a very expensive equipment to bypass the protection of specific hardware that's used at the company. So that's why I would prefer to be very selective of the content I consume. And if I don't see benefit in it and it's very high level and very infotainment, as I mentioned, I try to avoid it because it just creates noise in your head. It doesn't add value.
Interesting. So back to your daily role, I would say security a lot of the time is about understanding what you can do and what you should and shouldn't. Do you ever get the bad cop name? How do you view that?
I try not to create a culture like that because I believe in good intention in people most of the time. So you should, in this role, apply some emotional intelligence and approach people with respect and dignity and say, hey, this is why, for example, this situation might be risky for the business and us as a whole. At the end of the day, the consequences are shared among us. So we should have a shared responsibility and shared understanding about why certain things could cause other problems. And we also try to not create kind of a frat culture about it. Let's say if you forget your laptop unlocked, somebody would go there and put something funny in it or write a funny message in the common Slack channels. We try to avoid that because I don't think it fosters the right culture and the right respect to cybersecurity. I think that's old school. I believe that if people have they understand their responsibility in the overall security of a company, they could do better. Of course, you have two options here. One is misunderstanding, negligence. They just didn't know better. So you should go with good intention and explain them why certain things could lead to an incident or something bad. But also there could be malice, which has another word. It's an insider threat, and it should be treated completely differently.
How do you balance between, on the one hand, putting controls so no anything that is done in malice can't happen or no mistakes can happen, and on the other hand, education. So like making sure people know what they can and can't do.
I really liked, because I've listened to all the episodes of the podcast, somebody said that security should feel like a force field in Star Trek. I really like that comparison. It is very difficult to achieve something like that in an informational environment with many people and many systems and technologies because everything is moving. People are adding new apps everywhere, using various devices and so on. But you should probably strive for that. I think it's the right approach. So it should be invisible up to a point where something unusual and it doesn't look right happens, and you have the indicators for that. You should act accordingly. And to do that, you should basically monitor all possible digital spaces that you could in a way that they would alert you if something malicious is happening. And if you're not keeping yourself up to date on the news or up to date on the technology, or if you don't know how the technology works, and that's why I do believe that even a leader in the space should be hands-on, because if you can constantly delegate some junior or even senior members of the team might not fully understand the big picture or the overall consequences. So it's not bad for you to get your hands dirty from time to time and really ensure that the right controls are in there. But the way that we deal with most of things in cybersecurity and in other spaces, not only there, everywhere where there is involved risk, you should have a lot of like checks, whether that would be like a weekly, quarterly, whatever works for you, any sorts of checks. If automated, even better, so that you can verify that the controls that you have in place are actually meaningful and they work. And you could do that through many ways, internal, external, pen tests, red team operations, social engineering attempts. What we tend to do as a team when we have the luxury of time, because it's challenging to balance that. But what we try to do is spend a little time on social engineering or approaching alternative ways to access things and show our colleagues that, for example, even in LinkedIn, let's say if you're a salesperson or an HR person and you actively use LinkedIn, you could be approached by a completely fake, made up social engineering profile, and they could lure you in a multi-step process where you could believe that a sale is happening or you have an amazing lead or amazing candidate for a role, and at the last step they just like send you a link to, I don't know, a malicious PDF or something that contains a malware or a phishing page where you should provide your credentials. And if you're not very careful, it's easy to fall into that trap. So I tend to believe that you should be proactive about ensuring all these things and all these controls as much as you can.
Can you tell us about some of the security incidents that you've seen throughout the years, maybe the more extreme ones?
Sure. I've spent a lot of time on call, maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 hours, maybe more throughout my career. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of incidents, alerts, investigations of all sorts, even helped friends and relatives and other companies when they ask me for it, because I really enjoy it. There are a couple of incidents that I really can recall, and they're very interesting. So the first one is actually an incident that happened some time ago with a colleague of mine that was sitting a few desks away from me, and they were intentionally using a available capacity in our environment to mine crypto, which is really stupid thing. Yes. So I actually accidentally uncovered that. I wasn't really looking for it. I've noticed the high capacity usage and I was just vigilant. It didn't make any sense. So unfortunately, by the end of the day, we had to let that person go. It's just something that shouldn't ever happen. It was obvious that they were just malicious or stupid. I don't know. The other type of incident that I would usually deal with, it's quite common nowadays because of the darknet services where you can hire stress testers or services for where you can buy a large number of compromised devices to use them for a denial of service attacks. So I was dealing with a DDoS, the distributed denial of service attack, a few years ago that was very sophisticated. That kept me up one night. I don't usually stay up nights, but that one kept me really up because it involved hundreds of thousands of hosts, and it was very sophisticated. Like when I was able to block one side or approach on one layer, they would go back and figure out another approach. So it was like a little bit of a cat and mouse game. Essentially, we restructured the infrastructure and we were able to face that without any human involvement. But it took a little effort from our side to fight back the attack at the time, and it was very sophisticated, I'd say. It was not done by script kiddies, or maybe it was, but it was very well prepared and well executed. And
Interesting. Could you explain a bit more about that? Because like, how did that work? How did that come to be?
it's fairly simple. So if you go on any darknet forum, you could probably buy a bunch of infected hosts. They're usually shared and used for many malicious and illegal things, but it could be from your smart thermostat to your, I don't know, computer that you love forgotten in the garage and haven't updated since 2015, and it's just there to control the Christmas lights. And essentially, threat actors find those devices through search engines on the web, like Shodan and Census. They compromise them. They may even fix the vulnerability so no other threat actors can take them over. So now it's their device, not yours anymore. And they would use those devices. They would look like residential IP addresses. They would look like coming in from regular location, from your garage or your home IP address. And I have seen in my past experience some very experienced people, like engineers, directors of engineering, and so on, that have had like a Raspberry Pi that manages their thermostat that was compromised. So nobody is safe essentially if you don't put effort even in your home network. And they could pivot to your device even in some cases. But in that specific situation with that incident, they would use those devices. They would have a command and control server from where they would send commands to those devices. And basically they would serve as thousands and hundreds of thousands of proxies of their requests. So they would amplify whatever command they sent. It would be a web command. It would be a lower layer like TCP/IP, fluting, and so on. So they could do whatever they want with these devices. They can make them do whatever they want. And essentially, it's not very difficult to scan a product, a device, a company nowadays, and figure out like where are this product or this company weak spots. And by weak spots means where are the pages, let's say, or the functionalities that take large amount of resources to calculate. Let's say if you have like a scheduling website and probably to display the calendar for the year, that's going to take a lot of resources from the system. If I intentionally focus on that area, hundreds of thousands of requests, doesn't matter how much elasticity you have from the cloud and how much demand you could meet, if you don't have the right firewall rules, rate limits, controls, essentially the product will fall down and you're going to be unavailable. So this is what exactly these threat actors are doing. It's not very sophisticated. You can literally buy these kind of compromised devices for, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks for a few hours. You just rent them and then do whatever you want with them. And essentially, they're asking for funds in crypto. So they would send you a ransom message and ask you for a payment. If you don't pay, you're going to be taken down. If you have the right infrastructure, the right people, and the right processes, it won't be a very challenging operation. But if you're a small business and you don't understand technology very well, they could really keep you down for days, months, or even completely bankrupt your business.
That's crazy. Wow. And you had another story that you wanted to say? Another
But I want to share another one. Yeah, it's usually in the social engineering world, there are various types of attacks that you could execute. Obviously, through email communication, we call it phishing. To different types of communication, we call it differently, SMS smishing, and so on and so on. And once we saw a very sophisticated, it wasn't really an attack actually, I'd say, because it didn't involve any special skills. What they did is somebody, threat actor, they cloned a legitimate business that we and many, many other companies were operating with. It was like a consultant company. And they completely cloned the website. They went so far that they opened a legal entity, a company with the same name in another country, and they opened a bank account and so on and so on. And basically they started researching the web. Who are the customers of that company? So they sent them a ton of invoices, fake invoices. We call them business email compromise or changed IBAN and so on. And basically they send an invoice that looks like the real thing. If you look at it, it comes from the real company. It looks like the real domain. It's a little bit different, but it looks like. It's not, those like swap letters and things. It actually looks like the real thing. And the only difference is the bank is a bit different, the jurisdiction is a bit different, but the company name is the same. So I would expect that a lot of people, and probably they did, fall for this trap. I think it's a multi-billion-dollar illegal business it specifically business email compromise. And what happened is luckily the software that we use ourselves and we produce, Payhawk, when you change an IBAN for a recipient, it tells you, hey, this doesn't look right. So we track that, we identify it, we report it to the authorities, and soon that was taken down and they took legal action to find the threat actors. But usually they operate with financial mules, so they would find some people in various countries. They would not even explain to them, like they would pay them a certain amount of money and they would open the business or bank accounts on their names. And then they'll use those bank accounts to funnel funds to crypto or other means where they could potentially stay hidden. Well, in the financial world, that's a little bit challenging, but they still find ways to do it.
Wow. Interesting. Sounds like there's a lot of things happening where it's like stress is very high. Like you're very on the go, have to deal with this right now. How do you do that? Like, what's your mentality when it comes to everything's on fire? What do I do now?
That, like everything on fire in the security world, happens every other day probably. So if you don't have like a strong mentality or if you're not mindful, probably going to burn out quite quickly. And I say that with humility because I know that a lot of my colleagues are suffering from burnout and there is a lot of stress in the sector. And you need to be probably a very, I wouldn't say ignorant, but like very receptive to these kind of situations and maybe be a little bit of a stoic when things like that happen and don't react too quickly, I'd say. So the way that I would react when things are on fire, and I love when things are on fire, which sometimes is unfortunate, but it's interesting, it's exciting. I try to prepare for it. If you haven't done the sometimes mundane and boring work of preparation, and this is standard part of all these fancy frameworks that we follow, the one from the National Institute of Standardization, 862, or other well-known security incident response frameworks, you may be in trouble. But if you've spent some time to play through, I like to say, imagine like if you call like the fire brigade and they come on the scene and your apartment building is burning and they have never ever been spend their time, taking down fires before, and they just like started. They don't even know how all these like machinery works or how to take the people out. They're going to be very stressed. This is the same with cybersecurity teams. Like if you don't know how the technology works, if you don't know what steps to take, and sometimes even to make executive and business decisions that may temporarily impact the business. Let's say in a DDoS event, you would like to take down certain parts of the system so that you can keep, like in Star Trek, you can keep the vital systems on. You would like to do something like that in cybersecurity. And the way I tend to do it is by good preparation and doing the boring work, as we call it, or eating our greens. So doing a lot of incident response exercises to see how we would react on an event. And when an actual event happens, we are comfortable. We know what's that. It's not something surprising. We have read about it. We're expecting it in a way. So, hey, now we should follow what we have written. Of course, in the real world, that never really happens. I mean, following through a procedure that you have written step by step, usually from an event to an event, they may differ completely. So I think building a good team and putting the effort to prepare as much as you can, and then whatever happens, like you need to react on it. That's why really, once again, I'm going to reiterate that I really like the title of the podcast and I really believe in it. I believe that you should be hands-on. I try to be on the front line with my team to ensure that they're ready and safe and I can take over at any moment. And I think that's very helpful. And of course, there are things outside of your control, but you should do whatever you can to predict and prevent it.
Interesting. So one of the things you said is like having a strong team, how important that is. How do you build a strong team in cybersecurity?
That's a that's a difficult one, because in cybersecurity you need to have a complex suite of skills, not only technical. You need to have a lot of soft or leadership skills, because it's not only a technical job. Most of the people probably would agree with me. We're protecting not only technology, we're protecting process and people. So you need to understand that a little bit. The way I believe you build a strong cybersecurity team is, first, you put a lot of effort in hiring. You ensure that process is flawless. Then once you hire those people, you put a lot of effort in onboarding, but it's not job done at that time. You should continuously strive to evolve the team. For example, now in my team, we have some new starters that are a bit more experienced in certain areas. So I've dedicated them a little bit of time for learning and development, but not only for themselves only, but also for them to share to the team their knowledge so that we can spread it around. It's not just sits with them. And you just try to share with the team as much as possible. I really believe that, and I try to engage my team in the local community, because I really love the local community and really vital part of it. So I try to push them to present, to talk, to participate, to go on events, to go on cybersecurity conferences, to do capture the flag, whatever they want to do, some form of training, or if they would like to experiment with something, I'm really always up for it. Or if they need some training platform, because nowadays there are really amazing training platforms like Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, Pentest Labs, and so on and so on. And they have amazing courses that are really hands-on, like you can really touch things and test them and compromise virtual machines in a safe environment, or investigate events in various systems. So I'm really supportive of this kind of hands-on experience training, because it really gives back. But also, historically, I think security teams have been a little bit divided, siloed, if you wish. So I try to push my team and myself to always be out there and engage with other teams, communicate with them, so we're not isolated and standing on the side and doing the bad cop things, but we're involved into all other teams and all other businesses, and we talk to them regularly and we engage with them. This not only helps for my team and to be more understanding of what the business needs, how these teams operating, what risk they could introduce if they introduce an application of some sort, but also helps them to have humility and understand, for example, what are the struggles of the sales, marketing, and engineering teams, and how we could probably help them with something. And there's so many things that we can collaborate on, because, as I said, we are a mixed IT and security team, so we have a lot of cross-functional and cross-team collaborations. So that really, really helps. But I think really being close with the team and helping them to learn as much as they can. So sparing as much as possible. At the end of the day, we're here to do work. It's business, but helping them to learn and develop continuously, because the cybersecurity world is constantly evolving. And if you don't learn, you start to be left behind a little bit. So we try to stay on top as a team. We do lunch and learns at the office as well. As a team, we like to participate in capture the flags. Those are really fun events that we do sometimes. We just order pizza, stay at the office, and play till we are called out to go back home.
That's really cool. Sounds like there's a lot of just like a togetherness of like the mission.
Yeah, I truly believe in that. As I said, it's business. It's some people in the corporate world, they say, "Oh, we're a family." I don't believe in that. We're a team. We're more like a sports team. We have a common goals and missions. Of course, we're individuals, so we should be. We have different needs, and also I think, and that's one of the things I've learned from one of the previous leaders I worked for, that you should strive to build a diverse team as much as possible in all meanings, if you wish. Not only in terms of origin of people, but also in their mindset, because different people could bring different value to the team. You don't want to just bring copies of you or specific team member, and then obviously if you lay them down as a matrix, they're going to have exactly the same gaps or exactly the same things that are missing in their knowledge or understanding. And if you have a team that comes with a various backgrounds, let's say they've worked in different odd jobs throughout their career, but they then switched to cybersecurity, or some of them were like me, their whole life was revolving around cybersecurity. All of them can bring something very valuable to the team to make it more advanced, if you wish.
Interesting. Do you remember any leadership or security decision that you made in the past that turned out to be maybe not the best? And then how did you deal with that?
I mean, everybody makes mistakes. In cybersecurity, in these interesting frameworks that I mentioned, we have the idea of a postmortem where we review what went wrong. And we do it in a blameless culture. We try to find ways to prevent it from happening in the future, improve education, process, technology, whatever we can. And I've been also the reasons for some incidents and events. That's normal. I could share at least two things. One, during security events where we had to act really, really quick and implement firewall rules or protections. I might have been the rules that I implemented were too strict, so they might cause an additional impact at the time. So we had to go back, revisit them, figure out what that was the problem. So that's inevitable sometimes when you try to be balanced between being very, very quick to save the overall business availability, but you could also cause a little bit of harm. It's inevitable in some situations. And on the leadership side, because I don't have decades of experience as a manager, even with the many, many interviews I've done and hirings and working with various teams, I also make leadership mistakes as well. In terms of like hiring mistakes, that's also happens. And when it does happens, you just have to admit it and figure out what you could do in the future to prevent it, whether you should adapt your hiring process or the way you look at things. Are you too soft in the hiring process? Are you overlooking culture? Because that's like a person could be a very exceptional in their technical capabilities, but they may be lacking some important leadership skills that in the long run they may not contribute or fit in the team as you may wish. They may be a lone wolf or a person that doesn't like to be included and help others. So I've done these kind of mistakes too, but we just admit it, improve the overall process, take note, and move on. It's inevitable.
Interesting. And you were talking about the business side earlier. What would you say, how do you balance between enabling the business as much as you can and still remaining security, like sort of balancing them out? Because I would assume they do, sometimes it is one or the other.
Yes, absolutely. It's not one or the other. There should always be a way. Like cybersecurity shouldn't be always a place where you say no to things. There could be a no but, or there could be an alternative approach to do things and still like reduce the risk. I try to approach it. There's a famous triangle that has security functionality and usability in each angle. And the idea is that you should balance somewhere in the middle. Obviously, the most secure system is the offline one. So I try to do that with data metrics. And when I need to go to the leadership team and discuss implementations that may cause some form of friction or they need resources, I try to bring data and justify why and provide alternative solutions, because not every proposition may be accepted. That's normal. That's life. At the end of the day, we are here to do business, and the main purpose of the business is to be profitable. But also, we have a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, a lot of responsibility and trust of customers that we should ensure. So we should balance between all of these things. And most of the cases, there is a way. And in some situations, if there isn't a way, let's say if you tell a engineering team that they shouldn't be using certain technology because of this or that, and they are not susceptible to your recommendations, there are ways, essentially, sooner or later they'll find out. I don't want to be that guy that was, hey, I told you so kind of a person, but sometimes it happens. It's inevitable. Like people don't take note immediately. As I said, I don't try to be the bad cop, quote unquote. I try to just provide, hey, this is how this company suffered from an incident or a breach that was caused because of a misconfiguration or something minor that it looked minor at the time. So we could do that. This is the risk that we're taking. If you're comfortable with that, I'm not, but if you are, it's your call, it's your decision. So if you're comfortable with putting the company and the business at risk, cool. It's up to you.
Interesting. What would you say is currently the biggest challenge you're facing in the cyber world?
Well, there are plenty, I'd say. I would say one of the things, specifically in our space, where we operate this business, is compliance and regulations, because they evolve rapidly and constantly they require something of you. And although it's very, very important and they bring most of businesses up to a very high bar of security, they have a lot of paperwork and a lot of administrative effort that you should do as a team or a company that could be exhausting at times. We try to find ways to automate the evidence collection and controls implementation, but that's usually quite time consuming, like the overall process. And I understand that this is a process that we are suffering because the space that we are, financial, regulated markets, etc. I know that some other businesses are living in a very great world, or other businesses that are more B2C and they're more exposed to more sophisticated threat actors. They have different set of problems, so probably different things are frustrating and challenging for them. So at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. It's just something that we have to deal with. The other thing I would say is the very, very high cost of security products and services nowadays, just because they have the security label. Or if they introduce an AI label on top of that, that would be crazy, crazy amounts. And we try to be very resourceful when it comes to that. It's challenging nowadays because there are so many paywalls. When you reach certain thresholds of users or people usage, they try to push you to an enterprise grade licensing and costs, which is very exhausting for any business, I would expect, because at the end of the day, the technology is not very complicated, but just has this security premium label on top of it, and they try to squeeze as much as they can out of you. One thing that really frustrates me is that if all these like security companies and vendors, they really believe in that security is right for everyone, they shouldn't put that many paywalls for simple services. For example, if you want to use SSO and rely on your controls, that shouldn't be expensive. Not sometimes not free, but not expensive, not super expensive. Or when you like to use some form of a provisioning or more complex integrations with your security systems, that shouldn't break the bank. It should be easy to protect your own assets. And the frustrating part here is because most of the businesses nowadays are probably using a ton of applications, SaaS-based products, services, and they don't talk to each other that much, and there are no centralized, easy ways to manage them, especially those that don't support proper SSO or provisioning or alerting, and you need to manually go into those systems. We need to invent and make automations that are clunky and hacky. They do work, but it's a bit frustrating that for every system that we use, there's no API or an easy way for you to connect and communicate it. You need to do a browser automation or other hacky things to figure out your ways. And that's not very pleasant, but it is what it is. It's not the end of the world.
Cool. What do you think is one thing that CISOs don't pay a lot of attention to, but definitely should?
I would say a couple of things. Insider threats, definitely. Sometimes they're underestimated because people do believe that everyone comes with good intentions. And I'm not meaning that we should be super vigilant to our own colleagues and employees all of the time. I just mean that nowadays, with all these like sophisticated threat actors and governments that are putting billions and millions, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of very sophisticated trained security professionals that do social engineering attacks, and they apply even to those companies, and they go through interviews, and then they access their systems. We should be very, very vigilant to insider threats, the way we provision access, the way we monitor the intra company activity, because threats are not only external. I think nowadays security leaders, they put a lot of thought in the human factor. It's evident. Um, but they could do more about the communication and internal engagement with other teams. I think there's still a little bit of a stigma between security folks and other engineering teams, and they could cooperate and engage more because at the end of the day, it's for their common good. And last but not least, to think about creative ways to embed security into even mundane processes and operations. You would be surprised how many things in the day-to-day life of teams could potentially take a business down. From marketing teams managing the integration of third-party applications in the official website, to sales teams that have access to sensitive information and they primarily communicate through alternative communication channels, not the ones that you manage as a CISO or a leader. And here I mean social media like LinkedIn or other platforms, because there we have very little control and they could be doing that from their personal device, their personal phone, and so on. So we should really focus a lot more on the threats coming in from access and activity that's pivoted through people and employees within the company than before, because it's the easiest shortcut than just going through the technology. Technology is advancing real quick, and we have so amazing, well integrated firewalls, protections, detections, monitoring systems, etc. But at the end of the day, there is always the human factor there, the weakest link in the human machine collaboration, and it's going to be exploited for the years to come. So we should really be there.
As a cybersecurity person, on any level, and especially when you're really leading the team, you're always on. You're always like, you're ready for something to happen, ready to respond. How do you deal with the stress of that? Like, how do you disconnect sometimes? Do you ever disconnect? How does that work?
Oh, because I live and breathe in the space, I don't think I disconnect that much. But when I do, as I mentioned, I really love extreme sports. I really love flying. As I joke with friends, when you're risking your life on the weekend, there's not many things on the weekday that can really move you because you've already had like a lot of adrenaline and dopamine, and you've done very interesting things. Nothing really can matter and can scare you on the workday. But of course, if you're not very well prepared to face unexpected or unusual events, or if you don't have trust in the team, or if you don't put the necessary effort for the things that you can control, this is a very stoic kind of a mindset. At the end of the day, you're probably going to be quite stressed about it because you forgot to do something or you didn't prioritize right. So I try to do the boring and well-known risk-based approach to prioritization, and we try to do the first things first, and then eventually some things may happen. It's inevitable. That's why we have the large segment of security incident response in this sector. It's inevitable because it's a moving target. Everything is alive, even when we're sleeping or during the weekend when we're not busy at work. Threat actors are there and they're trying. So essentially, you just have to accept that some things will happen, and I hope you have a good security detection and monitoring system that will tell you about it. and put a great effort in preparation.
Cool. So we're kind of out of time. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So, um, what do you think the field is going to look like in a few years? And also, how do you feel about AI?
I love AI. I use it on a day-to-day basis for many things, from writing code to summarizing, documenting. As I shared with you, I prepare even for the podcast with AI. I just scraped all the previous episodes, transcripts, fed them into GPT, said, hey, tell me about the things that were not said and covered, or what are the new trends, or what are the new things. It's amazing. AI could do so much and also could do harm in the wrong hands, but it's not that scary at the end of the day. It doesn't change the paradigm. I mean, it's not making threat actors more dangerous, I'd say. It's not bringing new people to the space, whether on the good or on the bad side. It's just making certain things easier, but it's not the end of the world. Maybe I'm saying this thing for a few more times that I should, but it could be used for a lot of good. I would expect that in the next few years, AI will be heavily integrated in a lot of security products, not only from marketing perspective, but also from productive and efficient side. Obviously, could do a lot more with incident response in AI. You could make better decisions, essentially take considerations and take actions, maybe, and automated responses. It could be integrated in so many other fields. One of the tedious areas that AI is very heavily used is filling out security questionnaires. It does amazing job because you could feed it a very well prepared set of questions and answers and information and reuse it to fill out future questionnaires. It's very efficient for that. So save security teams a lot of time and a lot of effort. It can write basic code, and if you're knowledgeable, it can actually write very good code. Like, I wouldn't say advanced, but good enough, especially to automate mundane tasks. So I would expect in the next few years that to become relevant and to be in a very high use in our space. Then I would expect, of course, to threat actors to use it as much as possible and figure out new ways to abuse it. But I really hope that businesses and companies, especially SaaS-based ones, will introduce more security features and options for you to authenticate and protect customers, like passkeys and more ways to authenticate, which would be great. And at the end of the day, doesn't matter how technology will change in our space and how much regulations will increase, and that's inevitable. Actually, I think that's a good thing at the end of the day. Especially here in Europe, we see that regulations are really driving change and making companies do a lot in the cyberspace, invest a lot. And I would be happy to see that that's across the globe, like in all countries and all regions. They align with the EU kind of a level of frameworks and regulations like NIST and DORA, NIS2 and DORA and so on. They seems to be very, very useful to bring awareness in those businesses because in historically smaller businesses that were in a very sensitive markets, let's say service providers and so on, they didn't put much effort in cybersecurity. But now with all these regulations, they are obliged to do, and they do it. So it helps them to do more and to deliver more secure products. But at the end of the day, I still expect the human side to continue being exploited. And because the space that we're operating, not only as businesses, but the way we develop products, we introduce a lot of dependencies, libraries, vendors, and so on, and we rely on so many things. That would also continue to be a problem, and that's a challenging area for a lot of businesses. Supply chain attacks, risk management, and due diligence for vendors. So I would really hope to see some form of a standardization in that area that will really help us to evaluate real quick and be able to react real quick when things like that happen. Because it's not just like now people, technology, and process, but also vendors, that we put a lot of the things that we do as businesses in their hands. And yeah, last but not least, threat actors will still be thriving. Obviously, complex geopolitical situations, but not only. So, as we've seen for the last decade and a half, threat actors from certain regions have evolved so much. They're so undetectable. They're so sophisticated. That's going to continue probably growing. But I would expect that even like lower tiers of threat actors, not only APTs, but like even in the last few years, we're joking in the sector that yes, we're thinking about all these like nation-backed organizations that are behind major hacks, but at the end of the day, we're just fighting a group of teenagers like the Lapsus group that we're able to take down a number of large corporations like Microsoft, Samsung, Okta, and so on. So all of that, all these like technologies, AI, and generally speaking, the human factor can still be very easily exploited with all these controls in place. So that will continue happening. That's never going to change. The good side of it is there's going to be more work. The bad side of it, we have such a large arena of things to think about. It's a moving target. And the sad thing is that we need to protect so many things, obviously, like so many digital spaces, people, technology, and so on. And the other side, just need to find one weak spot, one vulnerability. That's a bit exhausting, but yeah, it's also very engaging and interesting. It sometimes feels like impossible, but we have to keep doing our best. The good thing is technology really catches up. I remember when we were very young and we were doing hacking and script kiddie kind of activities, you could do a SQL injection almost on every other website. Nowadays, it's not the case. Like we have so many sophisticated technologies and firewalls and so on. So it's very difficult to compromise things through technology, but it's still fairly easy to do it through the human side.
Perfect. On a more personal question, what do you find so interesting? Like what gets you up in the morning excited to go to work? And on the other hand, what keeps you up at night as a cybersecurity professional?
Not much keeps me up at night. Maybe when we play CTFs, and in the rare event when there is an incident, that's like very, very rare, but I have an on-call pager for that. But what keeps me excited is it's really interesting investigating events and looking at interesting stories. For example, the ones told in Darknet Diaries, they're really, really interesting and engaging. I really love listening or reading about things like that. It's so much fun when this is like real life things that have happened. So I really like the fact that we're operating in a sector, in an environment where things, technology, and threats are evolving day to day. There are new things almost every day. So that's super cool. It's never boring. Every day feels amazing. So I love that. I'm really excited about that. And that's going to continue for the days to go, because technology is going to keep evolving and cybersecurity is going to be along for a very long time.
Amazing. So final question. Before I ask, thank you so much for your time. I'm so happy that like you joined the show, and I think your take is so interesting. My last question would be, what would be your unusual piece of advice to someone who's either wanting to advance in cybersecurity or wanting to even get into the field, is thinking about it?
There's so many great ways to start in cybersecurity. I don't think there's like a one direction. As I said, at the end of the day, we're like fighting teenagers that have read something on the internet that are trying it against our business. There are plenty of amazing resources that people could use. As I mentioned, these amazing platforms that you could learn hacking and cybersecurity. You also, they're really good personal training roadmaps, like roadmap.sh shows you like a cybersecurity paths and things that you could learn. But one unusual advice that I could give people is to learn the ability to tell stories, storytelling essentially, because it helps you to bridge the gap between technical and non-technical people and concepts. As I mentioned, in cybersecurity, we protect people, process, and technology. And to be able to focus on the most important piece, people, because the majority of cyber incidents are coming through that vector, we need to be able to tell stories. Those stories that are actually happening in other companies or things that happen to us or things that could happen. If you're able to tell that in an interesting and engaging way to others, if you're able to present, if you're able to clearly articulate, to explain your point. For example, if you go to the board and you need a decision, you need help on something, you need to be able to give a very good explanation of why we ended up here and what our options are and so on and so on. And if you're not a good speaker, presenter, you're not good at storytelling, you may not be very efficient at that. And I do believe that's a very vital part of what we do in cybersecurity. So I highly encourage anyone that's in this sector. Obviously, there are fundamentals like technical skills and general security skills that you need to learn. But storytelling is really important. One of the questions that I ask at the interviews that I do for the team that I worked is, for example, tell me how and why would somebody compromise us and how would you do it? And you could obviously have read and listened a lot of things and you could know the technology and ways, but if you don't have a way to articulate and really explain the concepts, the reason, the motivation behind all of that, you don't have you're missing the big picture, you're missing the why we're doing all of this. You're just like following something that you read or maybe like a hype that you think cybersecurity is, but there's a lot of storytelling involved here.
Perfect. So I know you do a lot of talks and you do podcasts. Is there anywhere our listeners can find more of your content?
My website is very easy to find, miglen.com, and usually there are links, resources, social media, and so on. So easy to find, miglen.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Likewise. Appreciate it, Adi.